We continue our journey through Psalms with Psalm 45. For the leader on Shoshanim of the Korahites, a maskil, a love song. My heart is astir with gracious words. I speak my poem to a king. My tongue is the pen of an expert scribe. You are fairer than all men. Your speech is endowed with grace. Rightly has God given you an eternal blessing. Gird your sword upon your thigh, O hero. In your splendor and glory, in your glory, win success. Ride on in the cause of truth and meekness and right, and let your right hand lead you to awesome deeds. Your arrows sharpened, pierce the breast of the king's enemies. Peoples fall at your feet. Your divine throne is everlasting. Your royal scepter is a scepter of equity. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Rightly has God, your God, chosen to anoint you with oil of gladness over all your peers. All your robes are fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivoried palaces, lutes entertain you. Royal princesses are your favorites. The consort stands at your right hand, decked in gold of Ophir. Take heed, lass, and note. Incline your ear. Forget your people and your father's house, and let the king be aroused by your beauty. Since he is your Lord, bow to him. O Tyrian lass, the wealthiest people will court your favor with gifts, goods of all sorts. The royal princess, her dress embroidered with golden mountings, is led inside to the king. Maidens in her train, her companions, are presented to you. They are led in with joy and gladness. They enter the palace of the king. Your sons will succeed your ancestors. You will appoint them princes throughout the land. I commemorate your fame for all generations, so peoples will praise you forever and ever. This psalm starts off by declaring that it is a love song, and indeed it is. The writer of this psalm is in love with the king and with the idea of the king and everything that the king represents. There seems to be some kind of a fixation and fascination on the author's part with royalty here. He addresses the king, but he also addresses the king's consort and encourages her to forsake or put aside her family of origin and focus directly and solely on the needs of the king. Allow the king to be aroused by her beauty. The Hebrew word here comes from the root for passion, that her beauty ought to arouse and incite passion within the king's heart with the purpose of creating a progeny and descendants who will continue the monarchy and the king's line. I can only think of the intense fascination that so many people have with British royalty. All of the TV shows and films that have explored the private and public lives of British monarchs, we soak them up. We love watching them. Recent TV programs about the life of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, or Queen Victoria, and so many other movies that have been fascinating depictions of life within the royal palace of England. But I also can't help but think about our own version of British royalty that was called Camelot in the 1960s, the Kennedy White House. How handsome JFK was, how beautiful Jackie Kennedy was, and how American citizens venerated them and looked up to them and thought of them as if they were royalty, and were willing to overlook all of the faults of JFK especially, and were willing to overlook JFK's famous libido It seemed that people really didn't care as long as they presented like royalty. But the moral center of this poem, of this psalm, is found in the very middle of the poem, in verses 7 and 8, where the psalmist declares, "Your divine throne is everlasting. Your royal scepter is a scepter of equity. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Rightly has God, your God, chosen to anoint you with oil of gladness over all your peers." What I learned from this is that in order for the divine throne to be everlasting, the royal scepter needs to be one of equity, and the king needs to show and demonstrate a love of righteousness and deploring wickedness. The king needs to be a role model for righteousness and for good. In the book of Deuteronomy, in a section called Parashat HaMelech, the section of the king, Moses prophesies that when the time comes when the people of Israel will have a king to rule over them, that king needs to have a Sefer Torah, a book of the Torah, by his side to symbolize the idea that the king is mandated to rule according to the principles and teachings embodied in the Torah. The king is not to take power for himself in order to increase his wealth or to increase women in his palace, but rather to follow the principles of the Torah and, in a sense, to be God's representative among human beings. Only that would guarantee that his reign and his monarchy and his descendants would be everlasting. In today's world, we look up towards our leaders to be role models, to set examples for good and for righteousness. And sadly, we are often disappointed. Certainly, through our democracy, we have the opportunity, and through the political and electoral process, to vote for and to elect our leaders. But when leaders rise who do not necessarily represent our values, we then have the opportunity to be leaders in our own families and in our own communities. We have the chance to set a moral tone through the way we live and hope that our children, our grandchildren, people in our communities will observe and watch the way we live. And through the example we set, we hope that they themselves will follow suit. So we may not be kings, we may not be queens, we may not be royalties in our own lives in the way that the British monarchy is or the way that King David or King Solomon were, but we have the opportunity, in a sense, to be royalty within our own families and in our own communities. And I only pray and hope that through our inner moral compass, our own sense of wisdom, and our spiritual focus, that we can serve in ways that provide positive leadership models for those around us and for those who will come after us. Thank you.